Well, hello, I'm here with Doug. It's Friday, February 23rd, 2024, and we got a big story about girl influencers. But first, the AT&T outage, about which I've heard stuff. What have you got, Doug?
Yeah, so I don't have much. I'm not an AT&T customer. It didn't affect me. Thank you, or at least not directly. It didn't affect me. If anybody wanted to call me who's an AT&T customer, they couldn't because of an AT&T outage that affected tens of thousands of Americans. And it prevented them from making phone calls, sending texts, reaching emergency services, including 911, as if you can always get through on 911, not in the
That's
Bay
not,
Area at least. I'm kind of making a joke there.
no, but that's not good.
No, it's not. And also some police departments that depend on 911, I guess they have an alternate, they should have an alternate phone system. That didn't kick in, so their 911 system was down. And it also prevented people from accessing the internet. And it was a 12-hour AT&T network outage. And what did AT&T say? Well, we don't have a specific cause at the time that I did my research on this.
Well, this means
So
that the FBI surveillance was down for 7 hours.
is that right?
Well, they monitor the whole AT&T backbone. They have been for like 20 years.
Ah, I see. I see. So, this also meant we talked about this a few episodes ago. If you're relying on passwords or an app to access, say, banking, whatever services, I guess you're, um,
The app might have been okay, but an SMS would not be.
well, if you're doing password to log in, you wouldn't have access to the internet anyway,
Yeah,
unless you were on your computer. But I have like the Microsoft Authenticator app,
right.
and I also have login by password, and it made it inconvenient for people, I'd say. I guess you also couldn't call an Uber or a Lyft, services like that.
If you don't have any internet, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, or SMS capability for getting a one-time password code. So what do you have more on this story? That's all I have. After 12 hours, AT&T said, it's working now. We don't know what the cause. We'll investigate. But I'm sure they've got to know what the cause is.
Well, I got an article from yesterday at 8 p.m.
Yeah.
that says that AT&T announced, they said, we believe today's outage was caused by the application and execution of an incorrect process used as we were expanding our network, not a cyber attack. So that's
So
that's
they screwed up.
they screwed up. Remember when, like 15 years ago, remember Amazon Web Services went down for like 4 days, and they said, it wasn't an attack. It was us trying to roll out a new system that didn't work.
Yeah, what's interesting is why does it take so long?
Well, I know we don't know any details about this one.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
Amazon one was, in fact, a spectacular case of like network engineering going wrong. They were putting out a new load balancing system to prevent outages. So it was supposed to notice when servers were under high load and redirect traffic to the other servers, but it was backwards. So it noticed the servers that didn't have much load and redirected all the traffic to the single server that got overloaded. So
This sounds like my next story coming up. But
yeah.
Sam, so do you have anything more about the AT&T outage?
No, that's it.
No, that's it. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll have to listen. We'll probably never hear the complete details on this,
No, we'll probably
which
have some
is,
more lies coming out though.
yeah, yeah, that's what I would suspect. What do you have next, Sam?
Yep. Well, this is the big one, I thought. A huge article in the New York Times and one in the Wall Street Journal, both exposing that on, I think on Instagram, so on Meta product, what's going on is there are teenage girls and preteens being exploited by their parents with their parents' consent. The moms set up the account and then they post pictures of their daughters posing in suggestive poses, and they're surrounded, followed by pedophiles putting up comments all over the place and paying and leaving tips so they make money. In fact, so the New York Times article said something I didn't know. Nearly 1 in 3 preteens list influencing as a career goal. And 11% of those born in Generation Z between 1997 and 2012 described themselves as influencers. The so-called creator economy surpasses $250 billion worldwide. And uh, some of the child influencers earn six-figure incomes. So, and of course, health and technology experts have cautioned that social media represents a profound risk of harm for girls. Constant comparison to their peers and face-altering filters are driving negative feelings of self-worth and promoting objectification of their bodies. But it's big money, and it is their parents doing it with their parents' consent. So that's what really floored me. And in fact, Meta says they do not take a share of the money that people pay to see these things. They subscribe, they have like a subscribing channel to see the pictures. But of course, they are indirectly making money from the advertising. So and the Wall Street Journal said the Meta staff knew this was happening, got worried about it, and recommended that they should ban subscriptions to accounts that feature child models, which is what TikTok and Patreon and OnlyFans do. I didn't know this, but all of them do not let you put up pictures of children. But they also said Meta could require accounts selling subscriptions to child-focused content to register themselves so the company could monitor them. But Meta declined to do any of that, saying they have some kind of automated system that will weed out the pedophiles, which does not work. And
Well,
both
maybe the
Wall Street,
maybe the pedophiles are the ones who are not paying and they've been weeded out. And the non-pedophiles are the ones who are subscribing.
well, what they found, both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times were able to easily find obvious pedophiles, and they were able to find that when they get kicked off, they just make a new account and come right back.
Of
And
course,
so
right.
it really is this child exploitation has been huge. It's been a top law FBI priority for decades. And what's new, of course, is Meta cooperating and profiting off it. And what's new to me is the parents agreeing and promoting it. That would seem to me to make it almost completely outside the domain of law enforcement doing anything. I mean, what you always say is wait till your parents find out. Well, if your parents are approving of it, then what can
Yeah,
anybody do unless they're
so
going to actually take the kids away from the parents? What can you possibly do?
yeah, so Sam, couple questions. I've not seen the article,
Yeah.
but is this US based or outside
Yeah.
of the US?
Oh, these all the ones I saw were US.
This is US?
Yeah. And
Uh,
and this is something I heard a couple of years ago, and I didn't fully understand it. They said the younger generations want to become influencers. When I was a kid, people wanted to become like rock stars or TV celebrities, but now
well,
they want to become influencers online is the latest version of that. A lot
yeah,
of them. And so this is why I can see sort of the parents saying, well, this is a career, this is development towards a real job. And I can see a sort of just like I think of Michael Jackson's parents, he was this child star at like age 5 and 8. And his parents, of course, encouraged that. And he did get fantastically screwed up. They said, look, he's popular, he's making money. This is a real job.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Boy,
so
this is
yeah.
going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure the government can do anything, but I do think if I was running an internet company like this, I would just say, no, I'm not going to do this business. Even if it's legal, this is horrible, slimy stuff, and I don't want to do it. I would just be like these other people like Patreon and say, no, we're not going to do this.
Yeah, but as we know that this type of business or the porn business
Yeah.
is there's a lot of money behind this or to be made with this, right?
Well, there is, but this I know. And I'm thinking about like Taylor Swift, number one entertainer in the world. A lot of her act is her dressing in skimpy stuff and her sex appeal. So it's not just the music. A large part of a woman celebrity getting famous and rich is beauty and sex appeal. So,
Yeah. But isn't that the story after World War II in the 50s and 60s?
sure,
Yeah,
all the way
we
back.
yeah, yeah. And I'm sure it goes back before you go 100 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
It was women in non-full length swimsuits,
Yeah. And,
right?
and
Things
so,
like that.
so this, I think, is one of the really uneasy things that we've been struggling with forever is to what extent is this objectification and sexualization a legitimate profession, and to what extent is it a horrible abuse of people?
Yeah, yeah. So the interesting part is it's your own kids.
That's the part that
Yeah.
seems new and surprising to me, is the parents are in on it. And gosh, if the parents approve, then I don't think the law can do anything
No, I think
until
the
it
law,
reaches the extent to where it's so bad that you take the kids away from the parents.
yeah, the question is, what do you do? But here's the question is how suggestive are they?
Well, apparently
And
they're not nude, but they're
oh, if they're not nude, then
no, if I think if they were nude, I think even Meta would do something.
yeah, yeah, I would
They're
think
like in
so.
swimsuits and stuff. And so it's highly disturbing, but certainly not blatantly illegal, I think.
Yeah, I see. So we're towing the line here, so to speak.
Just like Hollywood has been doing for a long time,
For
the
yep,
fashion industry. Like I remember I met a woman on an airplane, and she was like 14 and she was flying off to do her modeling. She pretty said, "Oh yeah, I pretty much had to quit going to school, and I get like some homeschooling from my mom, but I'm making all my money for my life right now at the age 14, posing for like fashion magazines."
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's been going on for a long time.
No, and I don't know if this is true. Maybe you can support this, but when the Berlin Wall fell down, the first thing that people wanted was food. The second thing that they wanted was Western culture, music, and the third thing was porn.
Well, yeah, it's fine. This is the dirty little secret of anyway. I don't have a
Yeah,
simple answer, but these big exposés are putting more pressure on Meta. I know Scott Galloway says all the time that Meta is like a monster. They're like the cigarette companies. They're ruining the lives of our children, and they're a great evil in the world. And then he said, by the way, they're my number one recommendation to invest because the stock is going up if you can stomach the consequences. Just like investing in an oil and gas company, they you can make money, but you are contributing to something that's bad.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, let's go back to you
Obviously,
with
they're customers for this.
that's the problem. There's money to be made. And so that always complicates everything. I remember when Google took away Don't Be Evil, and they said, once you become a public corporation, doing the wrong thing to make money is the right thing for your investors. So it's hard to tell the difference between good and evil anymore
Yeah,
once
yeah,
big money is there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, we should talk about this DNS flaw. I heard the Steve Gibson podcast about it that was very good.
Yep, this has been floating around. So this is a flaw in DNS that was discovered after 24 years. Whoop, I have a typo there.
Yeah.
And this has not been found in the wild. So this was researchers that were looking at the spec for DNS, found a theoretical flaw and said, wonder if we can exploit this. And they were able to, in fact, exploit it. And what essentially it's doing is they're providing security credentials,
Right.
and they're making the DNS servers do massive calculations to find a security protocol, if you will. I'm trying to simplify this,
Yeah.
that both sides can agree upon. And what happens is one side says, nope, I don't agree. And it has to recalculate. And you
Well,
might have a little bit more, but let me just finish
yeah.
this.
Yeah.
And the calculations would take about 16 hours to complete.
Right.
So you've got processors running at 100% utilization. And then as soon as they're done, they get another request. It's another 16 hours. So again, this was not found in the wild. This was researchers that kind of like theoretical physics. They took a look at the protocols, the specs, and then they did some experiments to find out that it is possible. It's been fixed now, to the best of my knowledge. They spent a while to come up with a solution for it. But Sam, let me turn this over to you. I kind of gave the
Yeah, because I remember,
intro to this.
yeah, because it's not a negotiation between two servers. All it is verifying a signature.
Uh, Yeah,
But the
I'm
problem
sorry.
is
Yeah,
the designers of DNS just seem to not be practical thinkers. They're DNSSEC. They said you can have multiple signatures and you can have multiple keys without putting any limit on that. And it reminds me of some IPv6 flaws where you can have multiple addresses and no limit on that. And in retrospect, it doesn't make any sense to have these things be unlimited. You really should say you can have like up to 3 signatures and up to 4 keys or something. And that the
I,
way they make the attack is they have hundreds of signatures and hundreds of keys, and it has to do 200,000 calculations trying to match those. And that was all just sort of silly. And the cure was to just limit it to like no more than 3 signatures, no more than 4 keys, which probably
yeah.
should have just been that way in the first place.
Well, I think to defend the designers, I believe if I remember what I read, they allocated 16 bits for this,
Right. Well, 16
which
bits
was,
identifier the key, which is,
yeah,
of course, it was necessary at the time, but now that's clearly not long enough.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it was a short side I shouldn't say a short side, but it was something that was prudent. It made sense at the time,
Yeah.
but then in practice, we realized that maybe it wasn't such a good idea.
Well, I got involved in this as part of the IPv6, California IPv6 task force, and we talked about DNS and IPv6. And
Yeah,
both IPv6 and DNSSEC are really old, antiquated protocols with some decisions made in the 90s that are really questionable these days. Both of them have big holes like this. Like IPv6 has these extension headers that can just go on forever and turn out to lead to security flaws. It's this is just there's a thing there. Another thing came up on Steve Gibson's podcast, which is very good. People say, "Why didn't you put encryption in from the start?" He said, "Well, public key encryption wasn't invented until 1976.
yeah.
So
Well,
the
the
fact
internet,
is, the
yeah,
tech,
yeah, but the internet came later,
well,
right?
I only became aware of it from a Scientific American article in 1979, and it takes longer
Right.
than that to write real industrial strength protocol code. So realistically, people really were doing the best they could with the tools they had.
And there were probably a dozen computers at the time that
Yeah.
were connected to the DARPA net, which turned into the internet.
And they were
And
so slow that every bit mattered. So
yeah,
making something 64 bits when you could really make it only 16 bits was not a good idea.
yeah, and we still see remnants that today in HTML code with the numbers 404
Yeah.
for right, which are shortcuts.
Yeah.
Because you're saving bits there,
Yeah.
right? By putting out a 404 number, you don't have to explain in large text exactly what the error message is. We
Right.
see that in email as well. And
Yeah.
FTP, the older protocols, you see that.
Well, yeah, and I remember classful addressing. I was floored when I understood classful addressing. The reason IP addresses are the way they are is because you can read the first 1 bit and tell if it's class A, read the first 2 bits. So they're actually trying to do
Yeah.
calculations when only a few bits have come over the wire, because it was intended for a time when the wire was so slow that you didn't want
And
to wait for the whole 32 bits to come in before you started processing the address.
exactly. And if I remember correctly, we were still using some vacuum tube equipment at that time.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's
So, it's a product of the time, right?
yeah, well, that visit to the Computer History Museum we did a few weeks ago helps put it in perspective. This all came from like mechanical key punch things, and that wasn't that long ago.
No, it wasn't. And at the time that the internet DARPA was coming to, into existence, punch cards were still in pretty much widespread use at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
it's in retrospect, our security disasters are completely predictable. And we're watching it happen again with IoT and AI. Like AI, everyone is jumping on AI. Everybody is doing it. I hear ads. Wells Fargo has an AI they're going to put on your phone, and examples they give are cancel my credit card and look up my balance. And those are exactly the things that LLMs cannot do. Simple mathematical factual things are exactly what it can't do. Like they did a test recently, saw a few weeks ago, where they connected a large language model to a normal relational database full of numbers and asked it to do calculations on the database. And they found that its ability to do a simple query, its accuracy was 20%. And to do a more complicated query, its accuracy was 0%. They are terrible at this fact-based mathematical stuff. If there's a capture the flag contest I go where people are trying to trick it into revealing a password, and if you ask it, tell me the first 4 letters of the password, it will tell you the first 6 or the whole thing or the first 2 letters randomly. It can't count to 4. Those large language models, they're like humanities students. They know syntax and the pattern of words, but they can't do math at all.
Yeah. So they're using some form of fuzzy logic to come up with,
They're just
right?
extrapolating the words without understanding the words. They don't even understand that you're asking a math question. They just look
I
at the
see, I
pattern of
see,
words and then extrapolate what words would come after that.
I see, I see, I see.
But
So if you spelled out the numbers like ONE
yeah,
instead of using the number, these
yes,
models would take that as words, not
right,
as a numeric value.
right. And I think
Yeah,
if you type numbers, they also just take it as words. They're just doing a simple line through a high dimensional space of words. They are
yeah,
not understanding the way we expect computers like numbers and getting it right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. That's why,
yeah,
if you ask it to write Python code, it will cheerfully write Python code and then tell you, here's the output, and the output will look good. And when you run the code, it won't run it. It doesn't produce that output because they don't know what they're doing. They don't actually run the code. They don't know it's code. They just make a page that looks like a page from a manual describing code.
yeah. Gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha. What? All right. What else you have for us, Sam?
Let's see. Well, the other one,
You have some more,
yeah,
don't
a
you?
couple more. But yeah, about
Good.
there's a guy that there's an article that explained why people are so reluctant to return to the office. And they're pointing out many bosses want people to return to the office, but people are really resisting. And they're saying if you keep forcing employees to commute and work in an office, your best employees are just going to quit. And the classical explanation for this has been everybody got used to working at home. But he said, actually, it's the money. The cost of childcare, the cost of buying a car, the cost of gas is so high that they say working in the office costs you as much as groceries for a month every year. And people are
Yeah,
actually reluctant to return to the office just from the financial cost, in addition to, messing up their lifestyle and stuff. And, in the 60s, I remember the 70s, we were all saying everyone should just work from home, go on the internet, not clog up the freeways. It'll be better for everybody. Now that we got it, all the bosses are freaking out. But you know, I've never been forced to work in an office. I guess only a few times in my life. But a lot of people are just freelancers all the time. Like all my consulting is remote. Nobody cares. This idea that you have to go to the office or you won't get any work done seems to have been clearly proven to be false.
well, don't you think that that came from 20s, 30s manufacturing? Everybody goes in, you punch in,
Well,
you
but
have to know when you're working, when
no,
you're
no,
not
even
working.
even a few years just before the pandemic, everybody had to go to
Yeah,
work and they would make you sit in these meetings where you have 20 people in a room sitting there bored to tears. And
right.
the bosses all felt like somehow those meetings were super important. And all the
Yeah,
employees knew those meetings were just a waste of time.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's, I think it's some kind of abusive power dynamic where the bosses just like shoving people around and they feel like if I can't shove people around, I'm not doing my job or something.
yeah. So, in the San Francisco Bay Area, office space has hit a 36% vacancy rate.
Oh, yeah. And the businesses downtown are all closing because there's nobody to sell lunch to and everything.
Yep. So, you think the shutdown during COVID caused problems.
Yeah.
This working from home, I think, is probably far worse.
Well, it's a change. They just need to take all those office buildings and turn them into housing. There's a huge housing shortage.
No, no, the housing shortage doesn't exist either. In San Francisco, vacancy rate is about 6, 7% for residential.
Well, that's because it's too expensive. There's all these homeless people. I mean, and most of them are there because they can't afford a place to live, so they need low cost housing.
See, now you're changing the story. Now it's low cost
Well,
housing.
that's
There,
what I
there
meant.
is housing.
Well, yeah, it didn't mean make millionaire housing. Yeah, you need to provide low cost housing.
Yeah, the housing in the Bay Area, actually, including East Bay, this has been the highest vacancy rate in, I think, 20, 25 years.
Yeah, probably because
And,
it's holding out for a
and
higher price.
yeah, and, let me kind of throw something else in here. An unthought consequence of this is there was rent control that was created.
Right.
And now with rent control, it was never foreseen that I know of in any of the rent control laws for landlords to lower rents. And if you lower the rent, what happens is you've now lowered the base. And depending on how much if you drop the rent, say 10%, it might take 10, 15 years if the economy catches up to go back to fair market rents, because you've arbitrarily lowered the rent, which caps the amount you can increase the rent. You follow that?
Only vaguely.
Yeah. So in other words, let's say you're renting an apartment for $1,000 a month. You can do an increase of 2-3% per year,
Right. But if you ever
right?
did lower it, then you would lower the base. Right. So that's just what this is
Yep.
what all the free market people always say. If you tell them they can only raise it 2% a year, that means they will always raise it 2% a year
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you
And
disconnect it
here,
from the market. Yeah.
yeah. And here, what should happen is we should have a 10% decrease or a 15% decrease, because
Right.
that's what the market would bear. But landlords are saying, why should I do that? It'll
Yeah.
take 15 years at the 2-3%, 4% to get back to what my rent is currently today. I'd rather take the property off the market and wait and hold out on this or do something else with it.
No, it makes sense. Yep. And this is the fundamental tension in our structure between government controls on pricing and the old free market, because we
And
tried
free
the
market.
laissez-faire free market in like 1900 and we weren't very happy with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so,
So I'm
uh,
not sure what the answer is, but that's an unforeseen consequence.
well, I think the American answer is to just have this unstable struggle between the various forces so you kind of hit the middle rather than
Yeah.
anybody ever
Yeah.
winning. That seems to be the
Yeah.
best.
You got
Anyway,
another story for us, Sam?
I do have a couple, but there's one simple.
Yeah.
American drivers are more distracted by their phones than ever and running over more pedestrians than ever. It went up during the pandemic and it never went down. So apparently more people are playing with their phones. And when I see Teslas, you got a Tesla, right? They have this huge screen there.
Yeah.
It seems like that would really be distracting. I don't know. I don't have one, but that seems
I will
disturbing.
tell you, simple things like changing the temperature.
Yeah.
You got to hit the buttons,
Yeah.
right, to pull up the screen. So you're distracted and you want to lower the fan speed, increase the fan speed,
This is what
right?
I've
You have to
heard. They
go.
said you should have a knob because
Yeah.
touch things are too hard to manipulate. I think they certainly would be bouncing in the road and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's the other problem is you're trying to hit the heat and you hit a little bump in the road and all of a sudden you hit the air conditioning.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And yeah, I'm kind of making that up. And I find what you have to do is you have to put like part of your hand to stabilize it so that if you hit a bump, it's your hand is kind of part of the screen. So
yeah.
you don't the screen doesn't move as your hand kind of springs along there and hits the wrong part of the screen. But you're right. I wish that they would put some like shortcut keys that you don't have there. So you have to again hit 2 or 3 buttons, which distracts you.
Yep. Yep.
But wait, Sam, and we were told this, we were going to have self-driving cars.
Well, we're still being told that, and now they're pulling back on them because they run over a few people and they get all freaked out. But that the question is, my first thought was like 5 years ago, I said that'll be great. It's got to be better than human drivers, but apparently it's not better than human drivers.
No.
I heard articles where they said, in fact, Musk has like concealed and distorted the data, and in fact, Teslas are more dangerous than human drivers. I don't know if this is true, but it might be.
Well, in some studies, I'm sure it is, but let's we don't know if those studies are
Yeah.
biased or not.
Yeah, well, I got one more, which is actually pretty interesting. I
Yeah.
didn't know this. Chrome has come out with a new super secure mode for browsing, imitating Microsoft, which did it first in Edge's super duper secure mode, which I didn't know about. You have a secure mode, and in both cases, what it does is it turns off just-in-time compilation for WebAssembly. Now, I've heard about WebAssembly, and I've never started writing it. I teach classes in assembly, so I really should
Yeah.
learn WebAssembly. But apparently, it reminds me of ActiveX, compiled code running in the browser, made it possible to do super stuff, and then out came the malware. It turns out, of course, this is really dangerous. And apparently, the same thing's true of WebAssembly. You see, a lot of modern zero days come through this WebAssembly compiler, and turning it off makes you much safer. I wonder which websites will stop working. But now Chrome has it, and Edge has had it for years. There's an optional feature to run in a more secure mode, which they say will stop more than half of the zero days.
And do you know how you flip this on
You
in
go into
Chrome and
in
Edge?
Chrome, you have to go into the settings. This article tells you about it. Go into some settings in V8 and turn it on. In Edge, it's in the settings too. I've got an article that shows you how, and this article
So,
is
so,
a risky
so
bid.
one would think that you should be able to do a Control Shift N like to go into private browsing. But
Well,
what you're saying,
right now, they made them both pretty hard to find. So obviously, they
yeah,
don't expect normal people to do it much. You know, it reminds me of the thing that came out about 6 months ago on the iPhone. The iPhone has a super secure mode to stop Pegasus, which is a big
yeah.
thing. And it's
So
the same.
remind us what Pegasus
Yeah,
is.
Pegasus is Israeli spyware that can totally take over your phone. And it used to cost like $1 million, but now I'm seeing a lot of articles about people using it all over the place. So I think the price may have come down. And you can infect somebody's phone, and then you see everything, read their text messages, turn on the camera, record the sounds, and it keeps on happening to high value targets like
Okay.
journalists and national security and politicians and stuff. So it's really dangerous. It's essentially a military weapon, but apparently they'll sell it to anybody for the right price. And but so various rich and important people are using it to target other rich and important people.
Okay. So
And
let's get
yeah,
back to our original story.
Chrome secure mode.
Yeah, Chrome Secure Mode.
Yeah,
So,
it
okay.
turns off the new advanced features that made WebAssembly work, and apparently that makes it much more secure. So, for example, just putting in a version of Chrome that was several years old would probably accomplish the same thing in that regard. But anyway,
Yeah, but Chrome will update itself
of
unless you
course,
refuse, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd like to learn more about this, but this is apparently the just-in-time compilation for WebAssembly is what leads to a lot of zero days, which makes sense because that's a complex, dangerous process,
Yeah,
which is likely to have bugs in it. So I
I
have
would agree.
I don't know what's written. I don't know any common websites written in WebAssembly. I'd like to see what would you lose by turning this on. So I'm looking forward to more information coming out about that.
Well, yeah, but yeah,
The
I'm
only thing I know is
assuming,
Microsoft Windows Update used to
yeah,
run on ActiveX in
yeah,
Internet Explorer, and it was really the only common thing I knew that really relied on it. And so I wonder what it is that relies on WebAssembly these days.
yeah. So you don't know of any websites or any test sites to see?
No, I guess we could Google and find them. I'm just not aware of any common websites using it. So
Yeah,
it may be like ActiveX. It's just too clever by half and too much bother. Like Flash. Remember, everything was Flash 10 years ago?
yeah.
And then Steve Jobs said, I'm not putting this junk on my iPhone. And that was the end of Flash.
So this is the opposite, right? They've made it available, and we have
Yeah.
to see if web developers. So I'm guessing that the adoption rate on something like this, unless it's a brand new website, it's not going to take over. It's not going to.
Well, I guess we're going to find out. If people start using this special mode, then we'll find out what they miss. Maybe game.
Yeah,
Browser games would be the obvious case, I guess.
yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
All
Well, I
right,
think
is
that's
that
it.
it for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yep, that's it for me. So meet again on Tuesday.
Yep. Have another one of these on Tuesday.
Sounds good.